The Man Who Saved a Bear, and years later, the bear returned the favor. Part 1. The Encounter in the Forest. The dense wilderness stretched endlessly in all directions, a labyrinth of towering trees, whispering leaves, and the earthy scent of damp soil. It was a world untouched by time, where the only rules were those dictated by nature itself. The forest was alive with sound, birds calling from the treetops, the distant rustle of unseen creatures, and the gentle hum of the wind weaving through the foliage. Michael Carter inhaled deeply, savoring the crisp mountain air. The wilderness had been his refuge since childhood, a place where he could escape the suffocating demands of city life and reconnect with something primal. His grandfather had raised him on stories of survival, teaching him how to track animals, purify water, and navigate the wild. Now, in his late 30s, Michael still sought solace in these remote landscapes, finding a sense of peace that the modern world could never offer. This trip was meant to be just another adventure, one of many. He had planned a week-long trek through the remote valley, traveling light with only his essentials, a sturdy backpack, a rifle for safety, and a well-worn journal to document his observations. He moved effortlessly through the undergrowth, his footsteps quiet against the soft earth. 2 days into his journey, the forest canopy thinned, revealing a sunlit clearing. A small brook trickled through the heart of the glade, its crystal-clear waters reflecting the golden hues of autumn. It was the perfect place to rest. As he set down his pack, stretching his weary limbs, a sound shattered the tranquility. A sharp, anguished cry. Michael tensed. It was the sound of an animal in distress, high-pitched, desperate. He scanned the area, his heart pounding with urgency. The cry came again, closer this time. Without hesitation, he moved toward the sound, weaving through the thick foliage. And then he saw it. A bear cub, no older than a few months, was caught in a rusted poacher's snare. Its tiny frame trembled as it struggled against the cruel metal jaws clamped around its hind leg. Blood stained the ground beneath it, the scent sharp in the crisp autumn air. Michael's chest tightened, the cub's wide, terrified eyes locked onto his, pleading for help in a way that transcended language. He knew the risks. Where there was a cub, a mother bear was never far behind. He scanned his surroundings, his ears straining for any sign of movement, but the forest remained eerily silent. No protective mother came crashing through the trees. Michael took a slow step forward, lowering his voice to a soothing murmur. "Hey there, little one. I'm here to help." The cub whimpered, its small body quivering in pain, but it was too weak to resist. Michael knelt beside it, his trained eyes assessing the trap. It was an old, illegal snare, designed to clamp down with relentless force. He clenched his jaw in anger. Poachers had no place in these woods. Reaching into his pack, he pulled out a thick cloth and wrapped it around his hands. With careful precision, he gripped the trap's rusted levers and applied pressure. The metal groaned in protest before finally yielding. The jaws of the trap released, and the cub let out a feeble cry as it collapsed onto the ground. Michael wasted no time. He tore a strip of fabric from his own shirt and carefully wrapped the cub's wounded leg, using water from his canteen to clean the wound as best he could. The cub whimpered, but did not fight him. Exhaustion had overtaken its fear. "You're going to be okay," Michael whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Lifting the cub gently, he cradled it against his chest. It was lighter than he had expected, its small frame underweight from the ordeal. He could feel its rapid heartbeat thrumming against his palm. A deep sense of responsibility settled over him. This tiny life was now in his hands. As he carried it back to his campsite, his senses remained on high alert. He was trespassing in the domain of a mother bear, and she would not take kindly to his interference. But no matter how many times he checked, she never appeared. That night, under a canopy of stars, Michael tended to the cub. He fed it small scraps of dried meat, ensuring it had the strength to recover. As the fire crackled beside them, he spoke to it in quiet murmurs, telling stories his grandfather had once told him about the wilderness. He didn't know if the cub understood, but it watched him with intelligent, curious eyes. By the third day, the cub had regained some of its strength. It limped around the campsite, testing its injured leg. Once, it even attempted to climb onto Michael's lap, much to his amusement, but he knew he couldn't keep it. On the 5th day, when the cub was strong enough to walk on its own, Michael led it deep into the woods. He had chosen a location where he had seen fresh bear tracks, hoping the cub would have a chance to reunite with its kind. Kneeling beside it, he placed a gentle hand on its head. "This is where we say goodbye. Little one, you're strong. You'll make it." The cub hesitated, gazing up at him with eyes that seemed far too knowing for a creature so young. Then, as if understanding, it turned and slowly padded into the trees. Michael watched until it disappeared into the wilderness, a strange mix of relief and sadness settling in his chest. He had done what he could. Whether the cub would survive was up to nature now. As he packed up his camp and prepared to leave, he had no idea that this single act of kindness would one day come full circle in the most extraordinary way. Part 2. The Return to the Wild. Years passed, and life pulled Michael Carter away from the wilderness he loved. His time in the forest became less frequent as responsibilities in the city grew. He had built a career in environmental conservation, dedicating himself to protecting the very forests he had once called home. Yet, despite his work, something always felt missing, a part of himself that had been left behind in the depths of the wild. The memories of that bear cub, the one he had saved so long ago, often crept into his thoughts. He wondered if it had survived, if it had grown into a strong predator of the forest, or if nature had taken its course in a less forgiving way. There was no way to know. One crisp autumn, overwhelmed by a need to reconnect with the wilderness, Michael decided to return to the place where he had once rescued the cub. He longed for the solitude of the mountains, the whispering trees, and the sense of belonging that only the wild could provide. With a pack strapped to his back and a rifle slung over his shoulder, he set off before dawn. The familiar trails welcomed him like an old friend, their winding paths leading him deeper into the heart of the untouched land. Each step felt like a return to something sacred, a rekindling of a bond that had never truly been broken. Days into his journey, Michael reached the valley where he had last seen the cub. The landscape had changed. The trees stood taller. The undergrowth was thicker, but it was still the same untamed paradise. He set up camp near a small stream, listening to the gentle flow of water as dusk settled over the forest. That night, under the watchful glow of the stars, he heard something in the distance, a deep, rhythmic rustling, heavy footfalls against the earth. Michael tensed, his senses instantly alert. He reached instinctively for his knife, his pulse quickening. The sound grew closer, deliberate, unwavering, and then, emerging from the darkness, was a bear, a massive, fully grown beast, its thick fur glistening in the moonlight. The sheer size of the creature sent a wave of caution through Michael. He knew better than to make sudden movements, but something about this bear was different. It did not charge. It did not snarl. Instead, it stopped a short distance away, watching him with deep brown eyes that glowed with an intelligence Michael had never seen in a wild animal before. His breath caught in his throat. Could it be? His mind raced. It had been years, many years, since he had saved that cub, but something in the bear's posture, the way it tilted its head ever so slightly, felt familiar. Michael stood frozen, caught between awe and disbelief. The bear let out a low chuff, not a sound of warning, but one of acknowledgement. Then, in an act that made Michael's heart pound, the bear turned and took a few steps back into the woods. Before stopping, before looking back at him, as if waiting, Michael hesitated, logic warring with instinct. Was this a test? An invitation? He had spent his life studying nature, but this was something beyond science. Taking a deep breath, he followed. The bear moved with purpose, weaving through the trees effortlessly, leading Michael deeper into the wilderness. Though he knew he should be cautious, he felt no fear. Something told him he was exactly where he was meant to be. They walked for nearly an hour, deeper into uncharted land. The air grew colder, the forest denser. Then, finally, the bear stopped at the edge of a hidden clearing. Michael's breath caught in his throat. A secluded valley stretched before him, untouched by human hands. A small stream meandered through the lush greenery, and near the water's edge stood another bear, a smaller one, younger, a cub. Michael's throat tightened. The bear he had once saved had grown into a protector of its own, and now it had led him here, to this moment. To what purpose? He did not yet know, but as he stood at the edge of the clearing, staring into the eyes of the bear that had returned to him, he knew one thing for certain. The past was not forgotten. It had come back full circle. Part 4, A Test of Trust. Michael and the bear stood in silence, the space between them heavy with something unspoken. The towering creature had led him this far, deeper into the wilderness than he had ever dared to go alone. He was no longer just a man lost in the woods. He was a guest, an outsider being guided into something ancient and sacred. The bear's deep brown eyes held no aggression, no sign of threat. Instead, they carried a quiet understanding. It had remembered him, and now it was offering him something far beyond simple survival. A test. The bear turned and began walking forward, its movements slow and deliberate. It did not glance back this time, did not wait to see if Michael would follow. Michael hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward. He wasn't sure what drove him, the logic-defying trust he felt toward this creature or the deep instinctual pull to follow. Either way, he matched the bear's pace, keeping a respectful distance as they moved together through the dense foliage. The forest around them thickened, the trees stretching impossibly high. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. Every now and then, the bear would pause, sniffing the air, ensuring they were alone. Michael had no idea where they were going, and yet, he didn't feel lost. They walked for what felt like hours, weaving through nature's untouched labyrinth. Michael's muscles ached, his breath steady but labored, yet something inside him urged him forward. Finally, the bear led him to a small clearing, a hidden valley cradled by the forest's protective arms. A thin stream meandered through the lush greenery, glistening beneath the moon's pale glow. The place felt untouched, sacred, as if humans had never set foot there before. And at the edge of the stream stood another bear, a younger one. Michael's breath hitched. The younger bear lifted its head, sniffing the air curiously before turning its gaze toward them. The bear that had guided Michael here let out a low chuff, a soft vocalization that carried reassurance. The younger bear responded in kind, taking slow steps toward them before stopping a few feet away. Michael's pulse thrummed. Was this its offspring? The realization struck him like a bolt of lightning. The bear he had saved all those years ago had not only survived, it had thrived. It had built a life here, had found companionship, had created something worth protecting, and now it had brought Michael here to witness it. A deep wave of emotion washed over him. He had come into these woods seeking solitude, a return to the wild he had once known. But what he had found was something far greater, a connection that had never been broken. The bear stepped closer, its massive form mere feet from him now, and in that moment, Michael knew this was not just coincidence. This was not just instinct. This was gratitude. The bear had not only remembered him, it had trusted him. It had brought him home. Part 5. The bond that lasts forever. Michael stood in awe, his heart pounding as he stared into the deep, intelligent eyes of the bear that had once been the helpless cub he had saved. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. The fully grown bear had led him through the wilderness, guiding him to safety. And now, as if ensuring he was truly unharmed, it stood watching him, waiting for his next move. The cub he had rescued so long ago had not only survived but had thrived in the wild. And now, in the most unexpected way, it had repaid the kindness Michael had shown all those years ago. The realization sent a shiver down his spine. The bear let out a deep, rumbling breath before lowering itself onto all fours. It did not retreat into the woods, nor did it act aggressively. Instead, it took slow, deliberate steps toward Michael, stopping just a few feet away. Michael remained still, his instincts screaming at him to be cautious, but something inside him told him there was no danger. Then, in a gesture that stunned him, The bear nudged its massive head against his shoulder. It was not an attack. It was an acknowledgement, a silent gesture of trust. Michael exhaled, feeling the tension in his body melt away. He reached out slowly, his fingers brushing against the thick fur of the bear's neck. He could feel the warmth of its body, the strength beneath its hide. "Thank you," he whispered, barely believing the moment was real. The bear lingered for a few seconds before stepping back. It let out a soft chuff, one final farewell, before turning toward the wilderness. With powerful strides, it moved into the trees, disappearing into the dense foliage. Michael stood rooted in place, his mind reeling from what had just happened. He had always believed in the intelligence of animals, in their capacity for memory and emotion. But this was something far beyond what he had ever imagined. This was not just survival. This was recognition. This was gratitude. And then, as he finally gathered himself and prepared to leave, something else caught his eye. Near the base of a nearby tree, nestled between the roots, was a pile of fresh leaves and twigs. It was subtle, almost easy to overlook, but something about it felt purposeful. As Michael moved closer, he realized what it was. Food, berries, fish bones, remnants of a recent meal, left there, as if waiting for him. A gift. Michael swallowed hard, emotion rising in his chest. The bear had not only led him to safety, but had left behind something more. A final gesture, a reminder of their bond. He kneeled, brushing his fingers over the offering, feeling the weight of what it meant. Then, with a deep breath, he rose to his feet. The forest around him felt different now, more alive, more connected. He knew he would return to civilization soon, carrying with him a story that few would ever believe. But he also knew that part of him would always remain here, in the heart of the wild, where kindness had been repaid in the most extraordinary way. And somewhere in the vast, untamed wilderness, a bear, the same bear he had once saved, would continue to roam, not as a memory, but as a silent guardian, a bond that would last forever. The end.